Okay, great. The hour of 6:30 has arrived. So I'll call to order the Beal Early Childhood Center Building Committee for Monday, February 26th. We're here at 6:30 in Conference Room A. At 7 o'clock, we will go to the public hearing in the Selectmen's meeting room regarding a public sustainability workshop. So are there any questions on the meeting minutes from February 13th, 2018? Not hearing any. Is there a motion?
Motion to accept.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to accept. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, unanimous. Val, great job. You were not firing on 8 cylinders that night. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Caught some of the nuances quite effectively. So let's review the additional reports prepared by Lamoureux Pagano on the alternative sites.
Okay, very good. I'm going to have you take one of these as I pass them around.
Okay.
So as you're aware, we were contracted for additional services during the preliminary design program phase for the project to take a closer look at the Glavin Center site as well as the Allen Farm site. Those reports I want to go over with you, and the recommendation from them is to do additional work on these two sites to further develop the analysis of the two of them for the preferred solution report. So one of the reports that we received from the additional services was from CR Environmental, which was going back and taking a look at Allen Farm a little bit more closely to confirm the parameters of the wetlands so that we could, from a conservative perspective, look at the developable area of the northern portion of that site, and that was successfully achieved. Kristen Loss was present for the site review, as was Ecotech, which was the environmental consultant that had been hired by the community earlier. And they were all in agreement with the areas that we were looking at. So we were able to, through that process, refine it to a portion of that northern sector of the area. Additionally, CR Environmental, in looking at Glavin, saw no significant wetlands issues with that site at all. Another aspect of this first round was a review by Niche Engineering of both sites of a site evaluation, which is what's required for a PDP level. It's called kind of a desktop evaluation. This did not come forward with any significant encumbrances to development, although they did point out on the Glavin Center site that the sight lines, as they're called, as you leave the site for vehicular traffic, are challenging and are something that we should take a closer look at in the PSR. And in Allen Farm in particular, the proximity of the potential access point to the site relative to Route 20 in terms of traffic was another point that was made in that particular report. And then we had what's called a Phase 1 environmental report done for both sites. And at Glavin, the only thing that came forward that was something that we want to follow up on was a permit that was pulled for a 5,000-gallon gasoline tank across the street from the area where we're looking at developing for the school.
On the east side of South Street?
On the east side, yes, is reportedly where it was. There was a 2,000-gallon tank that we know was removed, and the soil passed in terms of not having any significant leaking from that tank and so on. So it's something we want to tie together as far as that goes. Based on these reports, however, we are going to recommend additional testing for arsenic and lead at both of these sites. Arsenic is a naturally occurring substance in the soil here in Shrewsbury. We did run into it on the Sherwood project, and we want to be sure that we do have that articulated correctly in terms of where the soil can go on the site and where it can go off-site. Additionally, it was noted that Allen Farm had an orchard on it, and lead was used frequently for pesticides for orchards, and so in some cases we have found high lead content in soil in agricultural uses, so we want to double check that on both of these. And then finally, we had a geotechnical, what's called a desktop review done of both sites. No red flags came forward on them, although additional geotechnical work for what's called test pits and borings we are recommending, particularly for the Allen Farm site. We're fortunate that we have the original borings documentation from when the Glavin Center was developed. So we have had that reviewed with our site engineer, and it needs to be understood that those were pre-development borings, so the landscape was changed, it was terraced differently. However, there's enough consistency with it that we don't feel we need it at this juncture. If that site is chosen as the preferred solution site, we would recommend that for the schematic design phase, but not at this juncture. So in front of you, we have received proposals for additional work for each of these in order to further evaluate the two sites that we have on the table. So the first item is the geotechnical proposal, which is for 4 test pits and 4 borings at the Allen Farm site. And this does require a rig, and we will get reports. And we'll also be able to use this soil for the next part, which is the environmental testing. We'll coordinate with them to give the soil to the environmental testing company to test that for arsenic as well as lead.
Question?
Yes.
And we're comfortable that all we need is that number at this time? That number?
Yes, that should give us adequate, that should definitely give
And then
us.
if we saw something, obviously, we could choose to
If
do
we
more.
see anything alarming, yes, we might have to go into that further. Again, recommend that for SD if
Yep,
that was the case,
understand.
yes, schematic design.
So this would be the Centec North site, the parcel directly south of Charles River Labs, correct?
Correct.
And regardless of the findings, and regardless of the ultimate site location, if we were to recommend it go to Glavin, all of this material would not go to use because it would then be given to our colleagues at the SDC for use and anything going forward.
Will be a benefit to the town regardless, that's true.
Questions regarding LGCI? Kevin?
Just one. So do we know enough about where the building would be located to adequately site the borings?
It's a great question, and yes, we do.
Okay.
Because it's relatively limited where the building can go. We've done, as you know, the test pit study. Additionally, within our office, we did what we call a design charrette, and we had everybody, probably 10 people, Sean, involved in it and looking at all of the different opportunities, which we will be developing further. And it's a pretty narrow band of an area where we can put this building in. And we feel pretty comfortable with that. It's a good question though, and it's not to say that something else doesn't come up where we might say, well, we want to pull it out. We'll just try to get enough within that band. There's a band of an area that can be developed. It's much more defined than the Glavin site in terms of where the building could be.
Patrick?
Okay, could you just describe the difference between a test pit and a boring?
The test pit is, a greater, it's like digging a broader pit. And a boring is actually a very confined area that goes down. So within a test pit, we can get a better feel for overall strata of the soils. A boring is what you hit is what you get. So if we, for example, if we hit a very large boulder, we might assume it's a whole vein of granite, or it might be a fair assumption, whereas a test pit will give us a better, broader feel for that. So it's recommended to do both at this juncture to get a sense.
And are the
of-
borings in the test pits, or they're
No,
separate?
they're
So it's
separate.
8 different
They are
locations?
8
or
different
actually-
locations, that's right, so we'll spread them.
It's a drill rig that does the boring, and it's a backhoe that does the test pit.
Thank
You
you.
could conceivably go between two large problems
We
if you
could,
just
and
did the
that's
borings.
absolutely, and we could do that anytime.
Yeah.
We know that, we could do the borings and miss all of the granite, that has happened.
Sure.
But, that won't, with any luck, looking at the soils profile, though, there's a fair amount of information available on the GIS maps. We feel that we should be able to get pretty reasonable data from this.
Further questions on LGCI? Kristen? Anything? Okay? Anything? Okay, good. Why don't we move on now
So
to
then,
Lord
That's
Associates?
the environmental testing that I referred to. This is to do, well, it's clearly the same cost to do both sites. Although you can look at sort of the soil profile in Shrewsbury and say, well, it's probably all got the high arsenic content. We feel it's important to do it at both, particularly with this orchard component
Yeah, of
at
course
the
it is.
Allen
Absolutely.
Farm. So we're recommending that. This is a very reasonable proposal that we've received compared to what we have had otherwise.
Questions on Lord Associates, Patrick?
So I'm curious, around the arsenic and the lead sampling, are there any, is this simply like an awareness piece, or are there any limitations that we found some threshold that would cause us to not proceed?
That's another great question. We are now finding arsenic at different levels in the soils in the Worcester County area. And depending on what level it is, it will determine what we can do with it in terms of either pushing it around on the site, and if there's not space to do that, moving it off-site. If there's a high level of lead, we'll need to be careful about how we prepare the soil for that, particularly with young students on the site. So,
I mean, the practical risk here is consumption, like someone's gonna eat
the lead.
soil, right? Is that,
And I think that's
That's the
a
human risk?
reasonable, right.
Okay. So it's a very low risk kind of thing. It seems to me it's more like awareness.
Well, it actually is a DEP requirement now, so it is, we do need to be aware of it,
Yep.
absolutely. But it may well be not only a factor between these two sites, I won't be surprised if they both come out similarly, but it will be a factor as we're developing the estimates for the project in terms of what we can do with the soil. And it will help us with respect to, for example, as the project develops, should we really be shooting for what we call a balanced site, where any cut is filled elsewhere, or is it something where we can have more latitude because this soil can go elsewhere and give us more freedom in terms of how we develop the design and the cost. So it actually is a pretty big factor with sites now in the Worcester County area, so.
Thank you.
So this is again an instance of understanding what may or may not be there, and then it's the marketability and any impacts of it.
Absolutely.
Further questions on the two Lord Associates? No? All right, why don't we go through the environmental? I can't see the second letter, CR.
CR Environmental is work that has already been completed. As I said, we have their reports, and in essence, it was to confirm the parameters within which we could consider a developable site. So we have that information in hand now. And again, this may be an asset to the town as well as,
Oh, sure.
as to this project in either respect.
Questions on this? Niche Engineering.
This is the recommendation for additional actual traffic counts at both of these sites. So this would be work to determine the impact of the traffic. Both of these sites, as you know, are sandwiched in between Route 9 and Route 20. They will have a different impact, and so this is a second traffic analysis, because we already own one. Additionally, what you'll see is Niche was able to give us a credit from what we did in the PDP phase because of the limited work that we did then. So this would have been basically a $13,000 additional cost, but they went and took a closer look at it and are proposing an $8,000 add for this, so. Any questions on that?
Questions on this, anyone? Any? No? I just have a question regarding, on page 3 of 6, item 12, work not included. Performing signal modification in intersection changes.
They will make recommendations regarding
Okay,
that,
that's what it-
but they're not going to go any
No, that would be
deeper
part of
than
the
that.
project.
That's a deeper dive, exactly.
Okay, but they are gonna make the
They are gonna
turning
make
evaluations or whatever.
recommendations in terms of, but it will be at a preliminary level.
Okay.
Definitely. Good question, good catch on that.
Any other questions? On the, if there aren't any, I will accept a motion on the 26th February 2018 series of proposals and additional services, number 2, for additional site-related testing for assessment during the PSR phase. The total amount is $25,450. As outlined by Katie, $10,500 for additional test pits and borings, a testing of the material found on site for arsenic, lead soils, $5,100. Wetlands analysis, which has already been completed, correct, for $1,850, and further traffic counts and analysis at both locations for $8,000. The total being $25,450.
So moved.
Motion been made and seconded. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, unanimous. Thank you very much. Anything else from the architect?
I will say that we're targeting the April 4th date for our sort of PSR core, as we call it, to be complete. And we're pushing all of these consultants to get this information to us so we can have it to evaluate for that. It is a push because it's a big spring apparently for people gearing up to do site work and construction, and so we're working to make sure that happens as well.
Okay, why don't we, in light of that comment, jump ahead to item 5? Because we actually need to set several dates in order to achieve our objectives and stay on schedule. So tonight is the 26th of February, right? Our next meeting would be 6 p.m. on 3/13, correct?
Correct.
And we have talked, Katie, that you would like another meeting on or about what time, what date?
April 24th.
April, so not a second one in March at this point.
No,
we'll just have
not
our
a second one in March, yes,
So
right.
we would then go to April, we think 24th, 1, 2, 3, the 4th, so 4/24, 6 o'clock.
And we would maintain excuse me, that I should leapfrog, we would maintain the April 10th, that's the assumption.
Okay, so we're gonna keep the April 10th.
Right.
Okay, I just wanna get everything on people's calendars.
Thank you.
So the 3/13, the 4/10, our traditional meeting dates. Add a meeting on 4/24 at 6 p.m. And then are we holding a plug for the 30th just in case, or were we comfortable?
Yeah, I think that's what we're thinking of doing.
In case we need it.
In case we need it.
So would folks please also plug in 4:30? The document being prepared is large. There may be, we all may have a variety of comments, so we just want to post a variety of meetings to get it in your calendars and then get it out publicly as well, so that posting is at least noted on and then we'll fill in the specific blanks. Everyone square with that?
So just kind of give you a sense, just like the last time we asked you to review it, we uploaded it on a Thursday, and we gave you to the following, beginning of that next week. So we're targeting April 26th for upload to you guys, and then your review period early that following week is when we were hoping to meet with you again.
On the 30th.
Yep.
Everyone square with that? Okay. All right, anything further before we go next door for the sustainability? No? All right, anybody else? Oh, Kristen, hold on.
Did you want the letter?
Sure, throw the letter in.
Could you just pass that down? Absolutely.
Has everybody seen the letter from the SDC regarding their hope that we go find work elsewhere? Regarding the site and the shoe and move on?
I haven't seen that.
Oh, yeah, so we'll get this around.
Yeah.
It's a nice hallmark, that card. So it lays out a variety of points from the point of the SDC. I will ask that we get copies around to folks so that they can all have this. I don't, I frankly, just as we've taken a variety of comments, we accept it, say thank you, unless folks feel compelled to write back. I think we'll simply say thank you and leave it at that. It's not a surprise that an organization whose mission is to develop a piece of land wouldn't want another effort to go in and develop that piece of land. So ultimately, the proposals approved earlier this evening will help formulate our recommendation and as well inform the SDC as to what might be possible or more realistic on that site. Do you want to add anything? You square?
I'm all set, yeah.
Would you like to add anything as a member?
I'm all set right now, I think.
Okay.
I mean, we just had the site readiness grant approved,
Yeah?
and we're working with Central Mass Regional Planning Council, hopefully to get the update of the study that was there for Centec North before, so that we'll have some, we're basically making progress, which is exciting. So,
Beauty. Anything else before we go next door? Okay, why don't we stand in recess until 7 o'clock across the hall. Good evening, everyone. We are now back from recess for a workshop session of the Beal Early Childhood Center Building Committee. This evening at 7, we're gathered in this room to receive a report from Alamro Pagano, our project architect, on matters relating to the sustainability components of a possible new elementary school in the town of Shrewsbury. So I'll now turn it over to Katie Crockett from Alamro Pagano to introduce the various folks we have here and outline what we hope to explain this evening and what we hope to achieve relative to public input.
Thank you very much. So our objective tonight is to discuss some of the sustainable opportunities for the Beal project. Talk a little bit more about the program in sight, but we will use this input to consider different opportunities as this project develops throughout. And today we are very fortunate to have 2 members of our design team with us. I always welcome that opportunity because particularly building committees and public sessions.
Speak into that microphone, please.
Into that microphone.
You can bring it over.
We'll just drag it over, Katie.
That does it. Okay. Often Lamro Pagano Associates is represented at these public meetings, but all of the team members that are behind us don't get to have much visibility, so they do tonight. The team members that we have here have worked with us on a significant number of projects that we have here in Shrewsbury and in other communities that we've worked in. So part of what we feel makes our project successful is our communication level with these people and the understanding of how LPA progresses with projects and makes them happen. So members that we have tonight are from Niche Engineering. We have Jared Gentilucci. Yeah, if you would all just acknowledge yourselves. The Niche Engineering is our site and civil consultant for the project. We have Kevin Seaman from Seaman Engineering, so he's here representing HVAC, plumbing, mechanical systems. We have Tom Lutinsky from ART Engineering. ART does the electrical, telecommunications, all of our security systems, anything that has an electrical component to it goes through ART. And last but not least, we have the green engineer present tonight. We have Chris Schaffner, who will be actually facilitating the evening. We have Carrie Havey, and we have Brad Newkirk. And again, not only have we worked with them, but one of the reasons we work with the green engineer is their stature in the sustainable community. They have successfully completed over 150 LEED accredited projects, 10 of which have achieved a platinum status. They are well respected in the sustainable community as thought leaders and are involved in many of the local and national organizations that are related to sustainable designs. We're very pleased to have them on our team. And so I work here from Lamero Pagano. I'm Katie Crockett. I'm the principal architect for this particular project. I'm joined by Sean Brennan, and we have Ian Welsh as well over there with the camera. He's a newer employee of our firm, so we're really happy to have this whole group tonight. Sean and I are going to quickly give you an overview of the Beal project so you have an understanding of the status of it. And the first thing I want you as a group to understand is where we are in the schedule. One of the reasons we're having this workshop tonight is we're actually in the early stages of the design, so we can take your input and we can consider it as it develops. We are in what is called the preferred solution report phase. So we're in the second phase of the feasibility study of this particular project. We've already developed the program that was done in the PDP, preliminary design program phase. Now what we're doing is focusing on what should be the preferred solution with all of these options. Once a preferred solution is selected, we'll launch schematic design. And schematic design is very important because following that, the community votes for authorization of the project. And we've developed a full estimate to go with that. And there's a whole process with MSBA, Massachusetts School Building Authority, which is partnering with Shrewsbury for this particular project. Following that, we have another whole set of design efforts. They're called design development and contract documents before the project is ready to be publicly bid and then constructed and finally occupied. So that's all mostly to give you a feel for the fact that this is early, and we really welcome your input in terms of what is most appropriate for Shrewsbury, for the sites that we're looking at, and for this project in general, so that we can embed it into the project as it develops. Sean?
Good evening. We also want to kind of give you a quick update of what we've done to date and what came out of the PDP, the preliminary design program. So we've been working with district representatives for the school. We've been also working with town representatives, and we came up with an educational program that was written by a school department and headed up by Amy Clowder. That education program really informed what this building is going to be and how it's going to support the education model. And from there, we looked at 31 sites to begin with. We got down to 6 sites that comprised 8 different parcels. Then we were down to 3, and now we're actually down to 2. The 2 sites we're down to are the Glavin Center site and the Allen Farm site. As far as part of the requirements during the PSR phase, we had to look at 3 different options. So this first one really is kind of a benchmark where we look at the base repair at the existing site to give you a sense of how much it would cost and what needs to be done to keep that going forward. And what we're here to talk about a little bit tonight is sustainable solutions that we can foresee for these possibly 2 new sites we're looking at new construction. What also came out of that educational program, I'm going to give you kind of quick background on what we're looking at as far as the new projects goes forward. After we really looked at all the sites, we were focused on trying to provide a school in the southern portion of Shrewsbury, south of Route 9. So the two sites we're looking at both accomplish that need. As far as the building, we're looking at a K-4 configuration. As you may recall, we were looking at a K-1 configuration originally. School department had voted and approved to go to a K-4. It's going to support 790 students. Through our numerous iterations of the space summary template, we came up with a building of 140,000 square feet approximately, and we're looking at a 2 to 3 story solution. As far as site features, looking at different counts at different schools as far as walkers, buses, parent pickup, staffing, we're looking at needing roughly, as far as site features, about 130 parking spots for day-to-day operations, 320 total for special events, summer programs. Some of you may know the summer program here for the extended year is very highly subscribed and very popular. Queuing for 12 to 15 buses. Parent pickup we foresee at both of these sites being quite high. It is quite high at a lot of the other schools based off of the percentages, but given the location of these schools not being overly in residential neighborhoods like some of the other schools in town. There's a paved recess area, a grass play field. Give you a sense of scale, we were targeting a grass play field similar to the size of the one at Floral Street School, for those of you that are familiar with the other facilities around, and then some tot lots. So that kind of target at looking at 12 to 14 buildable acres. And what I'm showing you here is what we did during the PDP was a very early preliminary fit. We hadn't had time, and that's what we're getting into now, is coming up with an actual floor plan that truly meets the educational program that the district came up with. But we came up with a footprint that was done, you may recognize it as Sherwood. We kind of looked at it, grossing it up to the size we need for here, and wanted to make sure that these could at least support what we're looking at. So this was one option as a preliminary test fit, showing a circumstance at Glavin. Another one for Glavin, looking at a slightly different orientation. And then the third one here you'll see is Allen Farm. As you may or may not know from previous meetings, Allen Farm, there's some quite large hydrology on the site, wetlands, potential vernal pools, that's really kind of constricted the site and limited us to looking at the northern portion as developable. We foresee being some site compromise probably on this site, but until we can really flesh out the building and test this site, we still think day-to-day operations, it will be able to definitely support a school of this scale. With that being said, anyone have any questions what we've done to date as far as where we are, what we're seeing? Otherwise, we're going to really try to get into the core of the program tonight. All right.
Thank you.
And I'm going to invite Chris up, and he is going to take it from here, and this is where the fun starts.
Well, we hope this is where the fun starts. So what we plan to do with the rest of the evening, I don't know if everyone's seen the agenda, but we were going to start with kind of just a vision and goal setting exercise to get a sense of what Shrewsbury cares about for this particular project. We have a pretty good sense of that already, but it's good to do it and kind of create a set of shared goals through that process. And then from that, we're going to dive into specific aspects of sustainability and work our way from the outside of the building in and talk about all the different elements that might go into this project, understanding that we're still at a very, very early stage. We don't even know exactly where this building's going to end up yet. So, but sustainability might be one of the things that informs the decision of the site, for example. Once we go through that, we're going to talk a little bit about the different certifications that are potentially available to us. And we're interested in doing that in part because as an MSBA-funded project, if we want MSBA's money, we have to meet one of these certifications. So you have a choice of being a LEED project or a New England CHIPS project, and you've done CHIPS in the past in town. Sherwood is a CHIPS project. So we'll talk again about what that means and what kind of options there are there. And then we'll do a closing round wrap-up, give everybody a chance to make sure they've been heard, and talk about some next steps. And that's really the outline of the rest of the evening. I'm a little bit interested in understanding everybody else who's in the room. I know the design team. I see lots of people here. This is apparently the building committee?
Yes.
Okay. And then other people in the room, who are you and why are you here? I'd just love to hear that as a start. I guess we want to keep you on the mic, so you say it, then I'll repeat it so that the people in TV land can hear it as well. So who wants to go first? Yeah.
I will. Basically, it's a public hearing and sustainability interested me, so that's why I'm here.
Okay, so public hearing, sustainability interested. Yeah, what's your name?
John Skelman.
John, okay. Thanks for coming, John. Who else would like to speak up and announce their presence? In the back there, yes.
My name is Kiran. I work in the renewable energy sector. I work in the wind turbine industry, now in the storage industry. I'm interested to know what's spanning out of this project.
Okay. And you said your name was Kiran? Kiran works in the renewable energy industry, wind turbines and battery storage. Interesting stuff. Who else is here that wants to? Yes.
Frank Koppel, town member and also in the solar industry.
Okay, Frank is in the solar industry as well. Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm Dana Canzano. I have 3 kids who have gone through the Shrewsbury school system. My last one is a senior this year. But I'm still interested in schools, and part of that is my wife is on the school committee. Relative to tonight's topic, I generally consider myself a green person and want to see where we're going.
Okay, and I'm sorry, your name again?
Dana?
Dana. Okay, so Dana is a parent, wife on the school committee, and is interested in sustainability. Yeah.
Brian Moss. I have 2 children in the school system, 4th grade and 8th grade, so just here tonight, just want to make sure that our kids, K through 4, get the most sustainable school they possibly can.
How many people are here are school parents, and that's why you're here? A lot of them. Okay, excellent. That's great. Okay, anybody else want to? Yeah.
Jeff Manning.
Jeff is
I have a
here.
child in 4th grade currently. I'm interested in green energy and just want to see what the plan is.
Interested in green energy. Okay, I want to see what the plan is. Well, the plan is we're going to work on it together. That's the plan here tonight. We have some ideas of what we would expect to put into the project, but really we're here to listen and hear ideas and think about what fits with this particular projects and all of the constraints and parameters that come along with it. Anybody else want to share who you are and why you're here? Okay, so what we're going to do next is a quick goal-setting exercise. So we're going to imagine that it's some date in the future. What date might this be that if we are on schedule for everything?
Oh, to be living in the school?
To be moving the kids into this school.
Should be pushing me on that. Let's call it 2022.
So we're looking at September of 2022, and the first students are arriving at the Beal school.
I did not.
And the question that I'm going to ask you is, what do you want to hear people saying about that school? And let's make it more specific. Let's say there's a reporter from your local newspaper. I think it's the Shrewsbury Chronicle. Am I right about that? Okay, so you got a reporter there, and they're reporting about the school. Maybe this is such a big deal that even there's somebody from the Worcester paper or the Boston Globe or somebody's there too, or maybe somebody from, I don't know, Green Building magazine who wants to talk about this building. So what are the things that you want to hear them say about this school? What are the things that would define this project as a success to you? They don't have to be green things. I would encourage you, since we're talking about sustainability, if you've got some ideas around that, that would be great. What I'm going to ask each of you to do is you've been given a few pieces of paper. Write down 2 or 3 things that come to mind, each on individual pieces of paper. And we're going to give you about 5 minutes to do that. And you have a question.
Yes. Can we understand your definition of sustainability?
Well, that's an interesting question. So definition of sustainability, I think that is to some degree in the eye of the beholder. So what we're looking at here to meet the requirements the MSBA sets forward is we're looking at, let's say, 6 basic categories of things that are incorporated in sustainability. So we want our building to be energy efficient to start with. So whether it's creating new energy or just using it in a very efficient way, we want to certainly do that. We want to put the building in a place that makes sense. So picking a site that is well served by the various infrastructure that it may need, and also avoiding sites that are potentially causing some sort of environmental damage. When we're designing the site, we want to think about the appropriate materials that go into the site. So whether it's the irrigation for the landscaping and ball fields and such that might be there, or how we deal with things like rainwater on site, things like site lighting, those are all aspects of that. We also are going to be thinking about how we use water in the building. So we obviously, water, we have a relatively large amount of it here in New England compared to other parts of the country and other parts of the world, but it still makes sense to use it wisely. And then we want to think about the materials that go into the building and their environmental impact. And then probably the single most important thing, I think, really on this project is that we're trying to create a good learning environment. And so part of that is an environment that is healthy and well-suited for the activities going on inside. And that means that it's going to have things like good air and good light and good acoustics. All of those things go together to make a building that we would think of as sustainable. And there may be other things beyond that basic idea that we want to capture. And if you've got those ideas, we're here to listen. So if you have something I left out that you think is really critical, this is the time to put that on paper. But that's where we're thinking when we talk about sustainability. We're talking about a building that does well in all those areas. Okay, so everybody clear on the concept here? We're going to take, I know some of you have been writing things down already, so we're going to take 3 or 4 more minutes to give you a chance to write down. Ideally, you come up with 3 things. If you only come up with 2, I'll let you off this time, but try for 3. And we'll then take a look at what we get. There are no wrong answers. It's just a brainstorming exercise. We want to get the sense of everybody in the room and what's on our minds. If you're watching at home, are people like watching this live, or they're going to be watching this at 3 a.m.?
Around the world.
Around the world. Well, you can play along at home. Let's see how we do. And if you think of something else, you know, you have an opportunity as a citizen of Shrewsbury, even if you're not here tonight, to provide your input, and I'm sure there's a way to do that we can identify. So everybody got their 3 things right now. Any other questions? Clear on the concept here? Make sure your items are on individual pieces of paper. That's very important. If you have more than 3, you can keep going.
You guys are all more than, the whole idea of setting these tables was up is we really wanted to kind of engage conversation between people that may not even know each other, different professions, different walks of life. So I really encourage you to come on over, grab a seat at the table if you don't mind.
Okay, you guys working on them over here? 3. Okay.
I have 2.
Only 2?
You said we get a pass, so
Yeah,
I'll take a pass. You shouldn't have put that on the table.
You wrote a lot in your script, so some people give us like 1 word. And some people write like they're doctors. Have some?
We need that. It's an important part of the welcome. And surveys unequally balanced by non-responders. Any survey is, you know.
You get another minute. Can you think of a better way to spend a Monday evening?
No.
Are you ready for some? Katie's got hers. We'll put this in the middle so we don't know where they came from. So we have some ringers in here too, so the design team's gonna have their ideas and then the rest of you. Anybody else? Last call. Yep. Okay.
You know every one that's here.
Okay, you guys. All right, something else comes up, raise these up. Yeah, we can talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're gonna do now, we got this pile of ideas, and we're gonna, and everybody kind of did this independently, but we're gonna go through these and try to see what's there, and I'm gonna need my glasses. And what we want to do is hear what everybody had to say, but then see if there are any kind of common themes, and we're gonna organize this a little bit. So I'll start. The landscape is beautiful and provides a lot of activity space.
Prepared flexibility relative to enrollment, thank you, and manages resources and maintaining resources
Prepared for flexibility, okay.
for flexibility.
The building space is so inviting, comfortable, and bright. Students and faculty are excited to come to school every day.
All right, sustainably designed, admittedly a bit nebulous.
Okay, the big picture is
Big
more
picture, yeah, big
sustainable.
picture.
All right. The project has been designed using low-emitting materials. Okay.
All right, leverage technology to reduce the number of people needed to educate. Leverage technology to reduce the number and people?
Number of people needed to educate. So we're gonna have robot teachers, yeah. Does anybody want to explain a little bit more what this one means? Or not? Okay. Connections between people and natural environment, outdoor learning spaces.
Avoid windmills.
Avoid windmills, okay. We don't want any giant windmills on the site.
Okay.
Here's an easy one. Innovative.
All right. Engage students with energy measuring / analysis. So we want meters, right, to be able to show what's happening with your energy use of the building. So we have an energy area, let's put that
I
down
think
here.
that's, as much of that is
Education.
more of like the building itself being
Yeah,
a teaching tool.
Right.
Teaching people about sustainability of the building. Okay, a paradigm for others to follow.
okay. Net zero energy building.
Net zero,
There you
all
go.
right. Was built responsibly, balancing town's financial capabilities with leading design concepts across the board.
That's a
Good
good
balance
one.
of finance and design.
Ooh, high percentage of fresh air. I haven't seen that air quality yet. We'll put that over there.
Those are all up here.
Okay,
Blends with environment. Okay, so that's sort of aesthetics.
okay.
Put that up with avoiding windmills.
Low life cycle cost.
Okay,
Put that
the
in the
cost,
cost
yeah.
area over here. We've got,
Should have hydroponics on the property. Will teach students sustainability, grow the plants, and can raise funds for the school.
interesting.
Okay, so that's
Kind of an
cool.
innovative one.
Yeah, that's engaging the students.
On time and on budget. There you go.
Heating and cooling that is energy efficient and state-of-the-art to last for 50-plus years. Kevin, you write that one?
I actually didn't.
Good learning environment. So that's an education here.
Markers should be refillable. There are 500 billion markers in U.S. landfills, according to this person. So we want all of our markers for our marker boards to be refillable.
There you go.
That's
Kind of an, yeah,
that goes up with, yeah, there we go.
okay.
More about the school operations.
Healthy environments for community use.
I want Beal equipped with dishwashers for reusables, no styrofoam or disposables. We're talking about food service in the
Yeah,
kitchen?
food service.
That's an interesting
That's interesting, yeah.
piece.
Cost impact to the taxpayers.
I assume they want a low-cost impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Okay. Wow, this building is the definition of smart in all respects.
Flexibility with use of fossil fuels for evolving energy uses in the next 50 years. So that's a good long-term one.
Local materials.
Oh, here's another materials. Polished concrete floors.
specifically polished concrete floors, okay. Great use of learning spaces built for the future, not the past.
Use of natural light. I don't think we have any natural light yet, do we?
Put
Put that over there, okay.
Trying to kind of cite water and
Yeah,
energy
okay,
materials
got it,
to
okay.
go across, so
All
I
right.
should explain that. Lots of natural light.
There you go.
So we agree about natural light, several people said that.
Efficient building systems.
Okay. Great indoor air quality leads to reduced sick days for students and staff.
Good one. 12 to 15 buses is not enough. The locations will require 100% riders. We'll need 20 buses. That was a more specific.
More buses, yeah. I agree with that. That's sort of an operational
Yep,
piece.
yep.
Need to take a good look at geothermal. Solar and wind does not provide enough energy. Should try to make geothermal work. Okay,
You
so.
want to give me a couple of years?
Yeah, sorry.
No,
Take the, I thought I
Sure.
divided it in
Nope,
half. and
that's
clearly I
okay.
didn't. Use recycled materials where possible.
Energy neutral or net positive solar panels with storage, water efficient equipment.
Okay. So that's got water and energy. Environmentally safe materials with the need for little maintenance as possible, like polished concrete.
There you go. Most efficient energy system uses renewable energy, unlimited impact to natural environment.
Oh, limited impact.
I'm sorry, limited, sorry. I was- Yeah, my mistake.
Cost-effective features such as passive solar collector at Sherwood Middle School. Right, that's Sherwood is with the solar wall up there, right? And passive, so that's energy and cost.
Durable materials and reasonable cost, life cycle, up front. Yep.
Great environment for learning. Done that a couple times.
Water conservation. We have a water section?
No, just
Put it-
sort of there.
sort of there,
With the,
okay.
the styrofoam. Energy efficient building.
Another energy efficiency.
Welcoming.
Practical design that focuses on ease of maintenance and longevity of systems. Kind of operational.
Sure. Largely daylit classrooms.
Healthy focus.
Healthy.
Is that healthy? This is healthy too.
Okay. Carbon neutral.
Building mechanical systems easy to operate. This doesn't have resources for highly technical systems.
Okay, so keep our mechanical systems
Simple, yeah.
100% renewable energy, no natural gas, battery storage.
Have space for a dishwasher, build a dishwasher for reusable plates. There you go.
Space is used efficiently.
Use renewable energy as opposed to fossil fuels.
The project has been designed to significantly reduce energy use and has incorporated photovoltaics.
Attempt to use solar energy in order to conserve energy in the long run.
Solar. I wish I was back in school again.
Serves the long-term needs of Shrewsbury Public Schools. This is kind of a, yeah, okay.
Enough space to educate all students, regular ed, special ed, English, language learner into the future. They've got three separate ones. Practical and safe vehicle, pedestrian safety, flexible use of spaces, lots of natural light. So that goes here because it's got everything on it. Got one more?
Lighting solution that provides something.
Solution that provides adequate lighting for
Adequate, thank you.
educational setting with high efficiency. So good lighting.
Good lighting. Insulation, strong design for climate control, to minimize heat loss, maintain cool.
Okay. What a great investment for the town. So forward looking.
Children friendly. There, and then, from scratch kitchen demonstrates kitchen real food.
Real food. And the last one, visually striking. All right. So
All right.
we heard what's in the room. So if we believe it or not, we did organize that a little bit. A lot of different themes in there. So one, hearing pretty strongly, is energy efficiency in general, and then some specific technologies to look at, like geothermal, solar, battery storage, the possibility of being net zero or fossil fuel free. I didn't hear anybody say net zero ready, but that's what people often talk about, the fossil fuel free is being net zero ready. That's a big piece. a lot as well about sensible approach, meeting the budget, having low life cycle cost, being easy to maintain, easy to operate. So those things are not necessarily in tension, but those are there together. And then good learning environment in general, with some specific thoughts about air and light. A lot of natural light, many people mentioned that. Some focus on the material aspects, so local materials, recycled content, things like that. And then I think quite a few about the opportunities for education that the building itself provides, whether it's the landscaping outside or the building systems. I think that's always an intriguing idea to explore with the school, and we've done that in some of our other projects at different levels, whether it's simple displays or somehow incorporating some of the building aspects perhaps into specific classroom activities. And then finally, sort of the big picture, welcoming, innovative, nice place to be, looks good, and is really just a good learning environment, a place you're proud to be. I think that kind of captures what I heard there. So I'll ask the group, are there things that you're surprised to see there? Or are there things that you're surprised not to see there? So one that came up pretty strongly, and I'm not sure when we do something like this, whether it's one or two people who are really focused on this or a broader concern, but the water and the food piece, so that the dishes and such, that seems like that's a real question for us to think about. What kind of food service and kitchen provided? What's typically done in the schools in Shrewsbury on that?
Sure, I can field that for now. So typically what we've done is transition to a disposable compartmentalized tray, and that has, of course, been kind of a trend in public schools, many public schools, to no longer use dishwashers for a variety of reasons. Of course, you've got water use, which you're eliminating. You eliminate some hygiene issues. You're, of course, increasing your waste production in terms of the disposable tray and plastic ware at the same time. So there's trade-offs to both pieces. And then the other part of it is that what comes along with dishwashing, of course, is the cost of the trays and the silverware and the staff to run dishwashers and the maintenance to run dishwashers. Those are regulated by the health department in terms of temperature maintenance, equipment maintenance, and chemicals that are typically purchased along with the water, of course, to clean and dry the materials. So that's what we've migrated towards, is a disposable tray. The thing that people ask us a lot about is, why don't we get away from that so we're not filling up the landfills with plasticware. And of course, we know in Shrewsbury that all of our waste is brought to Wheelabrator and then subsequently burned. So it's not filling up landfills. So those are all the various balancing and counterbalancing things that get weighed into that equation.
Sure. So it's really a policy issue for the town, and I wonder, Katie, if you could just briefly address whether that affects the design of the building, that decision about dishwashers and washing versus using throwaway trays.
Well, it absolutely does. I mean, we typically have to have designed a designated dishwash area. It's one of the factors in terms of how the whole kitchen cafeteria works together, in that you have to have an opening for that to happen.
So that actually is a decision that, if we spend time discussing it in a setting like this, it makes sense to do that. I just want to make sure that if there's something that really isn't going to affect the design of the school, that is a policy issue, we can say that's a policy issue, and you all discuss that, but it's not going to affect the design. So things like the number of buses served to the school might be an example of that, although perhaps the location we pick would affect that as well.
One thing we did do at Sherwood is we did build in a dishwash area. It's not open to the students, it's for the staff, and that could always be used for future as a future dishwash area for student materials, the idea would be you would cart them in. So there are alternatives to that we can address.
So the building's built so that if at some point the policy would change, then the building.
And I think that's one of the points that was brought up, I think flexibility, which is very important in all of this in terms of what is the policy, what is the state of everything today versus where we'll be in 50 years.
Anything else that is not there or you think we've missed that you want to elaborate on? We'll give you more chances to participate, but I want to make sure there's not some big issue that we've missed here. Okay. Yeah, you got one, please.
I'm sorry, and I apologize, I walked in late, so I apologize again if anybody came up here, but is it wastewater management, has that, external runoffs, has that been part of the landscaping?
So that's a great segue. We're going to start now by working our way from the outside of the building in, and I think the first thing really on our list is thinking about the site and the rainwater runoff and how that's being potentially handled. So it's a good question. So you can see it up here, but that's definitely something we want to talk about. There's a lot of regulatory issues around that, and it'll definitely, I think, Jared, will affect different strategies for different sites that might be picked. So I think we're going to address that in just a second. I saw one other hand.
Yeah, just a question on the food aspect of it and how it relates to dishwashers and styrofoam, but some of it's a larger picture of, so a lot of us when we were growing up, we had chicken nuggets and pizza, in our lunches. So I think it's a bigger question around, if you look at some of the universities, their whole dining strategy has changed from kind of the old slop and plop, methodology to on a tray to they have kind of like different stations and food stations and real food that they're making from scratch because it is our young kids. And so I'm just wondering if that design even changes it more than just a dish. I think more than just a dishwashing space, so looking into areas of how does that affect the kitchen design so that the kitchen's not becoming smaller and smaller, but food, farm to school, and the relationship and teaching opportunities can be really something that, should be dealt with or scaled up.
It's a really interesting question. I don't know, Katie, you want to just address that at all?
Now, obviously, that's a policy issue for the school. I don't know if Mr. Collins may want to speak to that a little bit as well. When we had our programming meetings regarding the school, there was a great interest in terms of connecting the students to the outdoors, the value of food. There's an existing greenhouse at Beal School that was discussed just in terms of a teaching tool. To that extent, it was a topic in our discussions. And we do see this more and more. I will comment, this is a K to 4 school. We do see more of the a la carte options, the stations type of thing for older students because it's very time consuming for the young students to go through the serving lines, particularly if they have a lot of choices, and I believe is the thought. So typically that isn't a high priority for this age level. However, we did have many discussions about various aspects of nutrition and food throughout the project. So that's something that we will incorporate to the extent that we can as architects, but a lot of what food is served is administrative policy.
Okay. Yes.
I have one more. It probably goes without saying that I think we obviously need to take a look at new and different ways of security within the building. And as a result of recent events, there's a lot of talk about that, but it seems like what is being done today from a security standpoint probably has to be completely relooked at. And in the next 2 or 3 years, how do we look at new and different ways of securing a building that we have not.
It's obviously an issue on everybody's mind. I think, Katie, you wanted to say something on that?
That absolutely is something that we are considering for this building and consider with all of these buildings as they come forward. So keep that in mind. I think tonight we want to more, although security is obviously an issue with how sustainable a building is, I think we want to focus on but look at all of the broader issues in the
I'll add though, if we're doing chips,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
there's actually a
A
requirement, and can you explain what that is, Terry?
In CHIPS, and we can certainly do this regardless of what rating system we choose, but CHIPS has been thinking about crime prevention for a while. They have a credit that they require early on in design that specifically addresses crime prevention and how that impacts your design. So that does have a connection to sustainability to a smaller degree.
So CHIPS is one of the, so.
We're gonna get into.
Yeah, so LEAD is a program by the U.S. Green Building Council, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. New England CHIPS, CHPS, not the people on motorcycles that you saw Ponch and John. Remember watching that when I was a little kid? No, not that little, but, and you have a question, so I'll get to you in just a second. Let me, it's collaborative for high performance schools. And so MSBA, Mass School Building Authority, who's going to give the town significant amounts of money to help fund this project, requires we certify under one of those two systems. And one of the things we want to choose fairly early on is which pathway we're going to take for certification. So once we go through kind of the issues, we're going to spend just a little bit of time tonight talking about the differences between that. But that's what that is, CHIPS. So it's a certification that the MSBA would require potentially for this project. And you were patient. What's your question?
Yeah, I've had some experience in contingency planning, and I agree with the gentleman's comment over there. The access and the egress to the property, as well as the building, is very important, you know, and that may become a major factor based on the different topography of each site. But think about that a little bit.
That's a good point. All right, so we got two more. So you guys, this is a good discussion. Go ahead.
Just on the pathways, I know there's CHIPS and there's LEEDs, but have you looked into the Living Building Challenge that like Hampshire College is using?
Yeah, so Living Building Challenge is way beyond either one of those. We could certainly look at the impact that would have, but for example, to meet LEED and to meet the MSBA requirements, the MSBA is going to require us to be 20% more efficient than the base state energy code. That's a minimum requirement to get the 2% funding, so we'll want to hit that. Living Building would require us to be net zero. So that's a big jump between those two. It's not to say that we don't eventually want to try to be a net zero building here. That may be something that comes out of this discussion. But there's a big additional piece. So at a minimum, we need to be CHIPS or LEED and get to that 20% number to get the full funding from the MSBA. So we're required to do one or the other.
Do you incorporate any, because Living Building Challenge is like, is the whole thing, but then there's pedal recognition where you can pick and choose, and then, or even in the case where you don't do any of that, do you actually review it and do any of those aspects that LEED doesn't cover?
Well, we can talk about those things. I think we would look towards Living Building Challenge, which has much more stringent requirements on materials, for example, than LEED does. Another place that we look for schools particularly is something called the WELL building rating system. So that's all about health and well-being. So that looks not just at how much daylight, but really what's the lighting quality, things like the life of the lamps and color temperature, for example. And then air quality goes beyond the few things that LEED looks at to expand that, looks at things like drinking water availability, drinking water quality. So I think all of those things can potentially inform the design. I would not expect that this project would be pursuing formal certification under either of those programs because there's a substantial additional cost to do that. But I think we could learn from those and incorporate elements of them into the design, absolutely. And then you had a comment here.
I just have I'm curious about, provided this goes through, is there an instruction manual that comes with the building? Such that, for example, you say, we're going to create this bank of windows for natural lighting. Teachers don't, or whomever it is, don't know about it, and they throw all the lights on, and therefore they've kind of defeated your opportunity for natural lighting. And you walk in the building, 3 years later, and you're like, everything we designed into it is now zeroed out because the occupants don't understand what the design was. And then secondly, relative to that, some of what was described at times seems somewhat maybe too techy in terms of like, do we have staff who can support these programs? So I'm curious what your experience is relative to that.
Kevin, do you want to address that at all?
Well, I know, like, on the
Tom could probably talk about the daylight dimming systems, which are all automatic if the natural light.
The actual lighting control system would address that issue. There would be what they call a daylight sensor in each room that would dim the lights to a level depending upon the amount of natural sunlight that would be coming through the windows, and that's completely automatic. Teachers have been known to try and defeat those systems, but keeping it as automatic as possible would try and reduce that risk, but certainly that design, that control design would be incorporated into the job, yes, by all means.
Yeah, there's another overlay on all this too, which is that part of the NSBA process is we're going to be required to have a third-party commissioning agent as part of the project. So what that third party does is comes in and represents the town's interests in making sure that the building is actually operating the way it was intended. So they're going to be involved in the design process to review the design that Seaman and ART have done and make sure that the control strategies align with what they see working. They'll be involved during the construction process, making sure the contractor is putting in the right strategies, and they're ultimately involved in making sure that there is a systems manual for the system so that the building operators will have that information and training. And so I think, and specifically if we do CHIPS, there's a requirement to actually do training of staff, which I think is an important point. If you've got lighting controls in a classroom or a thermostat in a classroom, it's important for the instructor in that classroom to know how that works and how they can get, without having to break things or override things. We do need to share that information. It's a really critical piece because we see many projects where the design intent isn't realized. Commissioning is going to get us 90% of the way there, and the last 10% is vigilance by all of us to make sure it happens. Okay.
I would just add that I think you brought up an excellent point that's a consideration for us all tonight, and that is about what is the value of simplicity of systems versus what you may get from performance, and that's something that might be a good thing for everybody to discuss here. And in terms of training, we've been starting to encourage groups of people getting trained, so there's more of an established group that understands everything, and then it does become a facilities and an administrative environment once the building is up and running. But I think we have discovered that with many communities that the simplicity of running a system in terms of long-term longevity, not something that is going to require to be replaced soon thereafter, or has a high level of maintenance and a high level of sophistication that is beyond what a community typically staffs. That's a huge consideration. That's a really important part of these projects. We may want to discuss that a little bit further tonight.
Yeah. So in the interest of time, I'm going to put these items here, are things that we want to think about, but we're going to park these over in the corner for the time being. But since this is a green shred, this is going to be the bicycle rack where we're parking these, not the parking lot. But we have one more, and then we're going to move on to.
I was thinking, like, as more and more cars are becoming electrified and one of them needs a recharging station, is there a thought given to a parking lot having like 2 stations or features having like?
So recharging stations, that's absolutely an option that the town could consider. I don't know whether the town has other charging stations that they already own, or that it might be that the local electric utility might have some in a few places, potentially. I know we've looked at that in other schools in other towns, and there are points in Lead and CHIPS available if we do that. So that's something that might come up. Personally, I drive an electric car, so the more charging stations, the better.
There's a new grocery store.
I like the free ones the best.
Yeah.
But most of them aren't free. Okay, one more, and then we're going to, can you just see me?
So, my name is Missy Halda.
Hi.
My concern is that having, I see the grass area and the tot lots and that kind of thing, having more accessibility to passive green space, where they're able to possibly, any nature, be able to expand programming so that they're able to have nature trails or interpretive walks or whatever like that as well.
I think that's a great point, and it's something I actually missed in my intro when I was talking to you guys before. If I go back or go to some of the other slides, some of the things you guys may not be aware of. So, Shrewsbury Youth Soccer, you got the soccer fields adjacent here, but as far as agricultural land, one thing you may or may not know, all the elementary school, which we're going to, if this goes forward, will be redistricted to K to 4, have a gardening program in their grade levels already. So the connection here of seeing it on the larger scale, and never mind the Worcester County Food Bank is right there.
Yep.
There are some great opportunities, I think, for the site to have that greater discussion of outreach between nonprofits with, site amenities that are in there in and of itself. And then the same thing goes for, as much as South Street has all of these hydrology and wetlands, it is a huge learning tool. Obviously, we're going to be conscious of not disrupting them or disturbing them or adversely impacting any of the wildlife. But I've always seen this as a great opportunity in a teaching tool for the students, and I think it's something that both sites have different opportunities to really engage these students at this level, and I think it's very appropriate to the curriculum that it's currently enforced in the
So
district.
the South Street facility, you'd have opportunities for boardwalks, possibly working with community land trusts where some other programming could be.
That could definitely be, and then I think in some respects though, I think it would be something that would happen after this project. Due to the permitting track with that, I think it could cause a lot of hiccups and delays if we try to incorporate it in the base program. But I think it would be a great initiative for the town to entertain as an option to, if this site was selected to move forward. But I would hate to see it be like the real snag for the whole project going forward, that we're really trying to focus on this, one educational thing that could be incorporated afterwards.
John,
Yeah.
why don't you stay up there, and
Okay.
Jared, maybe you join him for a second. If the two of you could just talk a little bit in more detail about some of the site options and some of the issues around that.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
We'll start working our way from the outside into the building.
We have the
And
laser-
the clicker's right here. And the laser pointer?
Give us a little help. So almost everybody familiar with the two sites? Anyone not familiar with the two sites? I think a lot of people
So,
know.
just to be clear, so there's still also an option of an existing site?
That is
Yeah.
going to be the benchmark for the kind of comparison of what it would cost the town to stay in this building. So as far as project being approved, funding, and moving forward, we're actually looking at new construction at either one of these sites.
So that site's just there for a theoretical exercise?
Yes.
Got it.
And to really kind of inform the town, because they have a redevelopment committee too, to looking at new use for that. So I think it'll be beneficial for them to understand some of the systems or egress or other deficiencies there.
Okay.
So as far as Glavin Center goes, the area that we're focusing on is the upper northwest portion. As I unfortunately don't have an existing site plan, but as you know, the Glavin Center is currently housed there between 3 interconnected structures in this portion here, and then a separate was a school, kindergarten area that was the temporary library when the library downloaded, when you guys did the library, for those that may have visited during that time. There's quite a significant kind of change in grade. There's both vertical road alignment and horizontal road alignment issues kind of coming through here. As far as the pre-construction, this used to just kind of be a rolling hill. If you look at a lot of the topography, it used to just kind of roll right up, and it was this nice kind of, like I said, rolling hill. The views out towards UMass and Lake Quinsiga are quite nice out to the northwest. So the things that we're going to be dealing with here, and Jared will know, is that we got to really kind of keep the grades to between 5 and like 8% for roads. You really don't want to go much higher than that. And as you may know, for handicap accessibility, for a ramp, it's well, actually, for a ramp it's above 5%. But to be a sloped walk, which doesn't need to have guards or handrails, it is 5%. So that's another huge things with getting access and being inclusive and welcoming to all those that will be visiting. I don't know if there's something you want to add at the moment. This site, I think, gives us some greater opportunities as far as developable area configuration and orientation, as far as sustainable solutions, as far as daylighting, capturing things with the microclimate as far as, you know, prevailing winds, you know, even passive heating options. Whereas as you can see on South Street, we're a little more limited in just how much we could probably rotate this building one way or another. But we could still orient windows and the building as much as possible to capture those aspects. This site.
Jared, maybe you could excuse me, but maybe you could comment a little bit on the stormwater
Yeah.
strategy.
Actually,
so
yeah,
it
sure.
could be
Could you
different
go
between
back to the
these
next,
two.
previous line?
We'll start with that one.
So again, Jared Gentilucci with Niche Engineering, I'm the project civil engineer. I don't get a lot of opportunity to talk about stormwater, because people sleep, so this is a good opportunity for me. So, talking about the Glavin site on Lake Street. So from a stormwater perspective, this actually is a pretty good site. One of the big benefits is it's already developed. We have a lot of structures there, a lot of pavement. Sean mentioned there's some topography change across the site, but we can usually manage that with some grading throughout the site. We can make that work. The fact that it's developed helps on the stormwater side because we have some existing flow already on this site. Like I said, we have a lot of parking lots, a lot of roadways, a lot of building. We're looking to basically do a similar type of site, obviously much different design, different layout, different facility, but from a stormwater perspective, it's very similar. We don't have great soils on this site. The other site's very similar. We'll get to that in a minute. So we have fairly low permeability rates on the soil, so we are somewhat limited in what we can do with recharge. We always like to promote recharge, promote sustainable, low-impact development options for stormwater. We like to see things like water quality swales, bioretention basins, porous pavement, things like that. If you have sandy soils, then you can implement those to your heart's content, and usually they work really well. You can still use them on a site like this, but with low permeability soils, they don't work quite as well, but we can still get some benefits from it. But the fact that it's developed is actually a really good thing from a stormwater perspective. The other good thing about this site, I see it as a very developable site. We don't have a lot of permitting, especially when it comes to wetlands for this site. The closest wetlands are over on the other side of Lake Street on the east side, and we're far enough away from those wetlands that we don't have any permitting associated with those. So very little, really no impact to wetland resource areas, so that's a big plus.
So if the project was to go on this site, I see lots of yellow lines, but it would be all just in that piece that's up at the top.
That is correct. Yeah.
They're not proportioned.
So as far as the part of the acquisition process, the state currently owns this. For those of you who may or may not know this, that the town is going through that process to see what they could get the property for. And right now they have a lease in the Shrewsbury Youth Soccer League group currently maintains and operates that lower portion, and that would be maintained for recreation under this purchase. And all of the property to the east would be maintained for open space and agriculture.
Are those playing fields also, would they be used by the school?
They could. Scheduling, I think, it would have to be worked out for post-school, but during school, you know, I think that there's a great opportunity there because the kids that play in the soccer.
And we talked a little bit before about gardening and such, and so is there an opportunity somewhere on the site to do some sort of a small garden that the students might participate in?
Oh, yeah, even within the limits, the upper limits, there's definitely extra space there to do that. And those that may know, you might actually notice that the land that's off here is actually up for lease right now, but it was actively farmed previously, and it abuts the Worcester County Food Bank, which is their main hub is right there.
Last question here is,
Yep.
Is there any site contamination? Are we going to dig and find out we need to get rid of oil tanks or something else on site? Do we know anything about that?
So the meeting that we just had prior to this, so we've been actively gathering more information on the sites as we go. We did a phase 1 assessment of this site already. We did a desk study for the geotechnical. We were fortunate enough that they had the boring logs in locations from when they did the original construction. So we're using that to suffice for geotechnical soil capacities at this point. For as far as what came of the 21E, there was in this smaller portion where there's some barns and storage facilities, there's one underground storage tank my permit was put in for, but there's no current records if it actually even went in.
Okay.
So that's really the one thing we got to look at. And then one thing that we're looking at in general for both of these sites, because Shrewsbury has high arsenic levels in general in the soils. We are gonna be testing for that, so we can understand what we can or cannot do with the soils on-site or off-site. But there's nothing of, no huge red flags like there's mercury or some other, you know, they weren't using or manufacturing pesticides or some other nasty stuff at this point.
I could speak to the arsenic just a little bit. So we deal with the arsenic levels, really in Worcester County, we deal with them on a lot of projects. I have multiple projects right now, actually working with Lenore Pagano on Worcester South High, and we have a lot of arsenic soils there too. It's not considered contaminated necessarily, but it's naturally occurring, you do have to deal with it. If you need to take it off-site, it can cost quite a bit to dispose of. So usually our goal for any site where we're dealing with arsenic soil, we try to balance the cut fills. So especially a site like this, we do have some topographic changes throughout the site. We try to balance those. So in the end, ideally, no soil leaves the site. And we can maintain all that soil on site, therefore not paying any tipping charges at the landfill to get rid of it. So obviously we want to save the cost there. Yes?
Again, if you already addressed this, I apologize.
Probably we did not.
The other thing with that site,
Yeah.
and that's the street, I know that there've been a number of traffic issues on the Route 9 and Lake Street. When Buffalo Bills went in, we had a fatality. And also a number of issues came up about mainly trucks within the little plaza there on Route 9. Is there a bigger plan of how to redirect traffic in that area? Because the other thing is, I love driving down Lake Street, especially in the fall, because it's beautiful, it's kind of rural feeling kind of thing, but as we're adding more cars, buses on both ends, what is the big picture?
No, it's a really good question. It is something that we are going to look into pretty extensively. We're going to do a traffic study for this site. I don't have any answers for you right now, but I can say that we're seeing some of the same issues. I mean, some of the things that Sean had mentioned it briefly, but as you come around that turn, he mentioned there's sightline issues both horizontally and vertically, because you're coming around the turn, you've got elevation changes, so we see that as an issue as well. But like you said, the intersection down the street too. So those are things we want to make sure we fully evaluate. We're actually going to fully evaluate those as part of the study phase. Normally, you don't do that until, say, schematic design, maybe DDs. We want to do that right now because we want to get into understanding those issues and how we can deal with them.
And just to clarify, we plan on doing them for both sites now, and it's really gonna be a traffic impact study. So it's gonna look at the existing loads, real counts as they exist now, and then the theoretical loads, which is all we can do for the school, and trip generation from it. And that's what Niche will be doing with us.
I have two comments about that area. I'm very familiar with Lake Street. There are two things going there. As you go south, that is down on your map.
Yes.
Okay. That thing floods. Really bad. And the drains, they get clogged up very easily. There's also a certain time of night, it fogs up pretty fast. The third thing is, there's a lot of wildlife up there. I mean, there are hordes, and I mean hordes of turkey. They come out around dusk, and they're all over the place. I mean, you know, a lot.
Yeah, I saw 2 turkeys this evening behind the funeral homes.
Yeah, a lot of turkeys. And I think because of the turkeys, there's also coyotes that howl at night out there. So just, you know, put that in your checklist or something.
Just to speak to the stormwater part, so that's further south on Lake Street?
Yeah, it's, Hilaire Street.
Okay.
Hilaire or Hilaire.
Okay.
As you come down, it's right where, I don't know, you can take a right and go back there. Yeah, anyway. Every once in a while that gets bogged.
Flooding issues, yeah.
So is what you're proposing there, would that help that situation?
Oh, it absolutely, I mean, we certainly wouldn't make it any worse, certainly, and our goal is always to make it better. A lot of stormwater on the existing site in the northern part, there's actually a drain line that runs through an easement. I believe that actually goes up to Route 9. And so a lot of stormwater goes out there today. So we like to mimic where stormwater flows. We don't like to change flow patterns or amount of stormwater that flows to design points. So we would try to mimic what happens in the existing condition. Obviously, there's still, topographically, a lot of this is coming this way. Most of the field area pitches that way. But the proposed design would obviously look to make it better.
Also, there's no sidewalks in that area. So you got a stroll, I don't know how many, it's quite populated. The west of that, quite populated.
That's a good point. I think, let's take a quick look. I want to make sure we get done by 9 o'clock like we promised. So there's a lot of stuff to cover. Let's go to the next site. And in general, the traffic and site access is going to be a separate study that's going to inform this. And so we're trying to find, are there other sustainability issues that prefer one site over the other?
Well, I'll talk real quick about the South Street site. So, unlike the Glavin site, this site, we have, obviously, Sean mentioned this, a lot of wetland flowing throughout the site. We have multiple bordering vegetated wetlands. We have an intermittent stream that runs roughly northeast to southwest through the site. There's another one that runs in the northwest corner as well. And I believe there is 1, 2, at least 3 vernal pools on the site. Potential vernal pools, sorry. So we're dealing with a lot of wetland resource areas. Obviously, we want to minimize impacts to those areas, and what you're proposing is development directly in them, and the idea is you propose your development as far as ways you can get from those areas. What that does for this site is it really concentrates the development area in the northern portion of the site, and it really squeezes it quite a bit. One of the other issues with this site, and it's typical with sites where you have a lot of wetlands, is we have pretty poor soils, low permeability rates. So from a stormwater perspective, this site would be much more challenging. Obviously, the permitting with wetlands, that would be a challenge. I think we could do it. We can make it work. But from a stormwater perspective, most of this site is undeveloped, and that's the big trigger with stormwater. Is we'd have to do a lot of mitigation in order to meet the regulations. So I see that as probably one of the biggest challenges on this site is to meet the stormwater regulations, just because of the fact that there's very little development there today.
And in general, I mean, a principle of sustainability would be that we'd rather build on a site that's previously developed versus building on a site that hasn't had development on it in the past. But that stormwater piece is an important one. The requirements from the state and from the Conservation Commission would be that you don't make it any worse.
Exactly.
So in the case of a site that's already developed, it's pretty easy to make it better. But in a site that is undeveloped, you're going to do a lot to not make it worse. Are there other things about the site that we want to talk about at all? A couple of things that come to mind around sustainability is things like the landscape and the planting materials, and things like needing irrigation. Honestly, I don't know, do the other schools in Shrewsbury typically have irrigation systems, or do we say it just relies on the water that's available?
Decorative lawn, we have no irrigation.
Okay, so
We have it for
play fields, yeah, okay. So,
sites.
absolutely, it's hard to maintain a play field in good working order if it never gets irrigated. Okay. And we talked a little bit about the potential for gardens on the site, and that would work on either of these sites without anything. And, you know, things like size of parking, those sorts of things we assume would be the same on either site. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about that in general. What kind of things can we do to mitigate the impact that things like parking and paving will have on these sites? How are we figuring out how big the parking lots need to be? Those sorts of things. That's something where you can target, lead, and CHIPS will give us credits for having smaller paved areas, or for using more shade trees on site, or natural materials, reducing the heat island effect.
One of the problematic factors is the amount of parking day to day, which is 120 spaces. And then finding a way to augment that, I think, is a discussion that we should have, in general, in terms of, in the summer, there's going to be a very strong summer program here.
Okay.
And that is maybe something we should have mentioned. The idea is this will be used year-round, and the entire school will be used year-round. There's such a strong summer program. So we anticipate air conditioning in the
Okay,
building,
so-
and a lot of summer activity, so that the gardening and the use of the exterior, unlike your 9-month school, you'll actually have an extended period of time when that can be used.
Yeah.
But I think looking at creative ways to do the parking, typically, we'll have that 120 at least for the everyday as paved area, and then how we can accommodate the additional parking, which is primarily for parent pickup for the
Right.
summer program, and creatively. Even sustainably and aesthetically, in terms of stormwater drainage, not making it look like a huge parking lot. all of
Karen,
this.
you mentioned things like swales and such, so how would that get incorporated into the parking? Would there be opportunities there?
One thing that comes to mind, and whether this would be applicable or not, we can figure that out, but with the day-to-day parking is a need that we know, and I think you want to stick with your typical parking lot design, your typical asphalt design. When you need additional parking, and I think of this like overflow parking, if you ever have an overflow area, one thing you can do to deal with that is you can look at some different type of paving systems. Either you're doing something like a grass paved system or a reinforced turf system. If it's not going to get used every day, some of these systems, they do have a little bit of maintenance, but some of these systems can be really good if it's more of an overflow condition. Because you have the benefit of less asphalt, and that system will produce less runoff. And so you see multiple benefits there to heat island effect and controlling stormwater. So I think that those are the type of things we want to explore, because we have overall a fairly large parking requirement, but the day-to-day requirement is a percentage of that. The other percentage can we look at doing some other options to minimize those impacts.
Okay. Yes, question, comment?
Yeah, directly related to parking. As we talked about, we saw the energy section on the whiteboard, and we're all mindful of the climate crisis we're in, and we have the K through 4, students, and as we look to, and the state looks to, and we look to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, and some of them there were talking about try to get off of fossil fuels or to do as much renewable energy, 100% renewable energy if we can, paired with maybe storage to store energy. Of course, that would be energy that would be solar. So when you talk about solar, you start to talk about where there is areas to house solar, which would be the top of the building and or parking lots, like when you think about UMass Amherst now starting to install them on parking lots. So there's actually a dual use to actually capture that renewable energy to meet those goals of having energy on site. I guess my first question is, looking at the great job that this local architectural firm did in the other buildings that we had, like Sherwood and the high school and the library. I mean, one of the things, everything looks fantastic, and one of the things I think as parents we're looking to is to see, are we going to be dependent on natural gas in another building, or are we, is that your plan right now to be 100% natural gas, or are we thinking to actually not have the heating systems relying on that and instead use solar? If so, that's what gets back to the parking question, because you're going to need land surface area to capture as much solar as you can to offset it. So.
Well, I think it's an open question what the mechanical systems are. We certainly haven't made a decision one way or the other. The typical approach would be to use natural gas. We're seeing more projects that are using air source heat pumps or even geothermal heat pumps to avoid the use of natural gas, and that's an analysis that we'd expect to do. I think going back to the specific site question, is there any difference between these two sites as far as space that might have solar either now or in the future? And certainly parking canopies we've seen as an option. Schools that have buses and parking canopies are not always necessarily compatible because of the height of the buses, and so we'd have to be careful about where those went. But I'm not aware, are there differences between these two sites that would affect that one or the other?
Well, we have more latitude with the Glavin Center site in terms of positioning of the building and the parking or any features than we do at the South Street site. That's kind of a basic.
So in this site, it's pretty much what you see for a footprint is what you're going to be able to do.
Well, I think we have some latitude within that, but not much. And the Glavin site, Sean showed a couple of different options, and there are many more with that. So I would say, in terms of orientation, that probably the Glavin site has more opportunity for being able to really use that as a focal point versus here. Here, we're going to have to try to find a way to maximize and optimize the program on the site that's available, make it function really well, and the sustainability, I would envision, might have to become less of a priority in that regard than the opportunities at Glavin Center.
Okay.
That sounds like a good place to transition, maybe.
Yeah, well, let's just do water briefly, and we'll come back to this issue. I certainly don't want to put this off as an important discussion and what everybody seems like wants to talk about, but
Yeah, it's a water.
So just wondering, because of this site and you're saying the low, it's not really permeable to have the water run off, but is there any issue with water coming back into the site?
With this site specifically?
Yeah, with this site, I mean, you mentioned a couple streams and potential 3 vernal pools. I mean, if I was a house, if I was gonna build a house, I wouldn't even consider anywhere near this.
Be a wet
I
basement.
wouldn't want the possibility.
Yeah.
of
Unless you had a
flooding.
really good drainage system, yes. Where the site, the developed area of the site is situated is a little bit higher than the rest of the site. So I think as long as you provide proper drainage for the building foundation, for the areas around the foundation, you pitch away from the building, your standard engineering practices. I don't see any major concerns with issues with groundwater causing problems on the site. It could cause some challenges, could be some challenges during construction with dewatering, especially again with the soils, they're pretty silty soils. When they get wet, they're hard to work with. So I think there's some challenges associated with that. But I don't see any major concerns with any potential water issues, especially at the building, you know, thinking about basements flooding and things like that. I don't see a lot of potential for that here, just because we are a bit higher on the site with the building siting.
So let's talk about water use inside the building just real briefly, and I'm gonna let Kevin talk a little bit about what kind of plumbing systems we'd expect. I think most of the water use, we talked about some use potentially in the kitchen, depending on what we do for dishwashing, but then other than that, it's gonna be primarily the toilet rooms.
Yeah.
So what's a typical approach that we might take on a public school that's trying to conserve water?
Well, typically, we'll use the low flush toilets, and they do have like the ultra low flush toilets. The things we've learned over the last several years as they have come out is make sure we have more aggressive pitch on the pipes, because we found that these low flow, even though the code doesn't require it, if there's any bellies in the pipes, even in new buildings, it creates a potential. So the ultra low flush, 1.28 gallons per flush. We like to still have the water urinals, but the 1 pint instead of the 1 gallon. So it's a very little amount of water use, but it allows you to do conventional cleaning methods, still allows a clean sweep of the surface with water, and you don't have to get into the gel and things of the waterless urinal. So we tend to favor that approach. And then as far as the fixtures themselves, that would be a discussion to have with the school, whether we want to have the infrared faucets that are automatic, or the spring loaded, the older, so those kind of things we would discuss.
Is there any kind of showers or anything in this program through fourth grade? I would typically not expect to see.
I don't think in an elementary school there would be any showers, so.
Okay. So that, question about that?
Is there any consideration of capturing the rainwater for the bathroom, particularly, maybe not?
I mean, I know we have looked into it on several projects, and it typically falls off because besides collecting the water, there's an issue with treating it, filtering it, pumping it, separating it from the general plumbing systems in the building, and especially with kids, you don't know, like, if the water's, if they're gonna ingest it or something, so you almost get a water treatment facility going, and it does become kind of costly.
We generally see that it's a better option if you're gonna try to reuse rainwater, to use it outside the building for irrigation.
Yeah, irrigation.
Or in some cases, mechanical systems that make up water, I think you might do that. And I think that goes for these two sites, that maybe if we're on this second site, you might need to capture some water to meet the stormwater requirements, and then you're gonna wanna reuse that. And I think at the very least, the garden should have a rain barrel.
Yeah.
I mean, that sort of goes without saying that sort of thing should be there. It's pretty simple, low impact, easily understood by everyone. When you start storing large amounts of water for irrigation, the issue is that you want the tank to be empty for the next storm, but you want the tank to be full in case it doesn't rain for a month. And when you have a full tank, it's generally when you don't need to irrigate because it just rains. So there's always some trade-offs around that as well. But to your point, rainwater reused in the building is a tough one to make work economically. It really is probably money's better spent other places, I would say. With a comment, and then we're going to move on to energy.
Young gentleman bring up the dishwasher situation.
We talked about that a little bit
Okay,
before you
shouldn't
came in,
brought it
yeah,
up.
so that's.
But the other question I have is when you're talking about sustainability in buildings, and what we saw with Beal and other buildings is that we kind of made them a little too small, so we could get them built. Is this building, are we looking to have capability that it can be flipped to a middle school if need be, or flipped to a preschool, that it has the capability of handling different age groups? Senior citizens, whether, you know, that it has flexibility.
We honestly have not discussed that in the programming meetings, but I will say we've discussed flexibility consistently. And so we are looking at classrooms that could be assigned in any number of ways over time. They're all to include sinks. They're all to support the project-based learning, encourage good hygiene, that type of thing. So there is another water source that every classroom will have that. One of the things, obviously, with a K through 4 school is, in terms of the plumbing code, we have to design it for the plumbing heights of younger children. But I would like to think that it would have adaptability in the future. And I think that the way we've been talking about it, including special education spaces that from one year to another might be substantially separate or part of an inclusion program or part of what we call a typically developing classroom. So we have an eye on that in terms of flexibility.
How about expandability? There'd be like a wing where you had to add on another 3 or 4 classrooms or 5 classrooms, go out that direction?
That's typically what the town of Shrewsbury has asked us to design, and that's how we have developed all of the designs, I think with the exception of maybe oak. So they're in the plans. But obviously the issue with that, and this is, perhaps it does relate to sustainability, it's much less expensive to build it initially than to put a smaller addition on it later, extend all of the systems and so on. But to your question, that has been the typical pattern. We're still early in this project, as we've discussed, and it probably would be a factor in terms of expandability between one side or the other here. Again, we can see immediately that the Allen Farm South Street site is what we're going to be we'll be very creative in terms of meeting the program to the extent we can, and that might be one of the factors that would have to fall off is expandability, whereas the Glavin Center site, we see a lot more opportunity for future expansion that we could try to develop into the project.
Let's move on and talk about energy, and there's a few pieces to that. So one piece is the reducing the consumption of energy that the building is going to have, and that'll be everything from how the building envelope is designed and the orientation of the building to what's happening in the building and how we handle the loads through heating and cooling, and also really important to that is the way the lighting works. And so maybe we could quickly, you all talk a little bit about the typical approach you might take for the building envelope. Kevin can do a little bit on mechanical systems, or talk a little bit about lighting and other electrical pieces as well. So I'll let you take that first.
In our firm, we have been advocating for really looking closely at the envelope in terms of the benefit of, for example, at Sherwood, it's a very tightly designed envelope so that it does help tremendously in terms of maintaining energy levels within the building. Additionally, of late, we've been looking at adding insulation to the exterior envelope, again, to reduce load. We were able to work with Seaman Engineering on an elementary school for the city of Worcester, where we were able to reduce the size of the HVAC loads to the point where it wasn't only, it was a greater initial cost in terms of adding the insulation, but it was also a reduction in initial cost due to those units and the potential, the respective operating costs were reduced, this is the type of approach that we advocate for. We have found that over time, that the cost-benefit analysis for that is typically very good compared to adding a lot of different systems and complicated systems in terms of looking at energy efficiency. So I really appreciate that you brought that up first, because that's always the number one step, is to look at reducing your loads to the extent that you can.
Right.
All of the schools that we've been designing are 100% LED lighting, and it was discussed earlier in terms of occupancy sensors and daylight sensors. Those are typically integral within the buildings themselves.
Many of those are actually required by building code, so we're gonna get those whether we like it or not.
Night setback, everything, yes, yes.
So I think one of the things that we should talk about a little bit is some of the process that is our typical working practice, but also required by the MSBA and by state law. We're required by state law on any project funded with state funded money is to do life cycle costs of different options related to energy. So a typical process that we'll go through in the feasibility and schematic design phases is to look at things like different levels of installation and different mechanical systems and project the construction costs as well as the operating costs out so that the town is able to make an informed decision based on the life cycle costs of those different options. We've gone through that on every project we've done with you, whether it was looking at wood pellets in Ashburnham or ground source heat pumps in Worcester, and all of those sorts of things. So that'll be there. But maybe Kevin, you can talk a little about the kinds of things you're thinking about for the mechanical systems. I think it's interesting that this is going to be a year-round use, so we're thinking that the building would be pretty much fully air conditioned. Are there any pieces that might not get air conditioning even at the summer use? Like a gym, for example? No.
The plan is, yeah, I mean, I think the boiler room, we won't air condition. No, I mean, obviously, technology has advanced quite a bit in the last several years, especially with air source heat pumps and things of that nature. So those are items we look at, but we don't necessarily just jump on them and say, well, that's what we should use. You know, we always think of long-term and ease of use and efficiency, the operations manual somebody mentioned, right? You know, we like to see a classroom that maybe its heat source may be some radiation along the wall, maybe built into the millwork. Now, where is that heat coming from? Okay, it could be a boiler plant, but it could also be a boiler plant that has the ability to hook up to a ground source heat pump that provides that hot water to the building, or an air source heat pump. And that was one of the measures we looked at Auburn Middle School. They were going to go with a geothermal supplement into their boiler plant. At that time, MSBA said they weren't going to fund it at all, so they pulled it out of the project. But I don't know if they've changed their tune since then. But so those are things that we look at as designing a system like that for very low hot water temperatures, and the insulation in the building is key to that, to be able to heat the building with those low temperatures, so that you can integrate new technologies in either now or at a later date when it becomes a possible viable opportunity. The other things we try and do is keep the maintenance low in the classrooms instead of having, God forbid, unit ventilators, which we really wouldn't use in a new building, but so you don't have filters that change in every classroom. Filters are centralized. The ventilation is treated at a central location and sent out to every room. So those are the kind of things we do. And then we look at how we distribute that air. We typically look at bringing the air in low at the breathing zone, so we can do a couple things. Save energy because we can reduce the amount of outside air when we do it that way. And secondly, it just provides a better comfort level and more healthy environment, because you're not mixing all the air around. As somebody coughs, gets all mixed around.
That's called a displacement ventilation system.
It's called a displacement ventilation system. That's what we use at Nelson School. That was recently built, and it's conducive to air conditioning too, because you're providing a nice cool blanket of air down at the level, and all the heat rises. So you're using that natural convection process to try and cool the rooms and keep the, you may cool from here down, but up those top 4 feet could be much warmer than the temperature. So you're allowing yourself kind of a sandwich effect, so you're not air conditioning the entire volume of the room in a way. I mean, it's still going back to the unit, but there's efficiencies with how that whole operates. So.
Kevin, could you address a little bit, the questions come up a couple times about eliminating the use of fossil fuels. And so what kinds of things would be different if you were going to take that sort of approach?
You know, like I'd mentioned, the heat pump option is something like that. Using that electric. I know some people say, well, you're buying electricity off a grid, which is being made from natural gas or coal-fired plants at 28% efficiency by the time it gets here. So how is that a savings? But I think the local generation with solar panels and stuff feeding those kind of systems can be kind of a nice, you know.
Well, it's interesting, actually, the electric grid in New England is relatively clean compared to other parts of the country. So we did a recent study for a school up in Andover, and what we found there was that just the difference between a high-efficiency condensing boiler and using air source heat pumps was about a 50% reduction in greenhouse gases, even though they were going all electric. What also happened, unfortunately, because of the price of natural gas, is even though they were saving greenhouse gases, their energy costs were actually rising because electricity is expensive relative to natural gas right now. If you looked at that 10 years ago, that could be the opposite. And that's one of the constraints we see on the ground source heat pumps is people who are looking at ground source heat pumps are finding they're actually going to not have a payback at all because they have higher first costs and they increase their energy costs based on the current utility rates.
Right.
Especially on the heating side.
It's really, yeah, because things have, with the fracking technologies, they've created all this cheaper natural gas, and the electric rates continue to climb, but the natural gas rates drop to lower levels, so it's kind of upside down things. But that doesn't mean you still want to plan and, you know, for trying to reduce your use of fossil fuels, which is why we try and super insulate the building and use heat recapture, energy recovery units to try and recapture a lot of that heat. What I found with some of the models we've done, and I know Chris has found too, is, you know, you make a building really tight and you recapture a lot of heat energy, and you put, you know, 25 kids in a classroom with the lights, and you don't need to heat it. I mean, there's enough heat being generated. You actually need to, like, cool it, you know, you need to bring that winter air in to just try and cool things down. So it's, you know, so that's all a goal in reducing those fossil fuels.
So I think at this point we would say we're definitely going to look at all electric options as well as natural gas, and then present the information for a decision that the town would make based on that.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk briefly about the lighting or other electrical issues that would be there?
Well, the lighting, of course, will all be to the energy code. It will be completely LED, automatic controls, night setbacks, daylight harvesting, so that there'd be a minimum amount of light based upon the amount of sunlight going in. LEDs have a long life, so that the replacement cost would not be that high. And color temperatures would need to be worked out, but certainly something quite comfortable for a classroom type of situation. Most of the lighting would be, I would guess, a combination of both direct and indirect, so that the atmosphere would be pleasant. Pretty much so.
So then, that leaves yes, please.
So a question about exterior lighting. What's the thought about parking lights? I know the place where I work at, they have lights that, well, when they go on, obviously at nighttime when it's darker, they'll have dimmers so that, you know, they'll sense anybody in the parking lot, but still be on for safety, just get brighter when you approach it.
Yes, for a lower level of light, and then if they have a sensor, they'll actually be able to detect somebody in the area, and then the lights will go to full brightness for a certain amount of time, and then go back to the lower level. Yes, that's part of the automatic controls, even for outdoor lighting. Yes, absolutely.
I know that some towns have looked at doing dark schools. Is that something we'd look at here at all? Is that
Talk about that more.
Well, the idea of a dark school is that there isn't, in fact, any lighting for safety in the middle of night. It's just dark and all the lights are off, and then there are sensors, so if somebody does show up, lights will come on. But as opposed to keeping lights burning 24/7, 365, we turn those all off. And some towns have done that and said, well, gee, actually, we feel like that's a better way to keep people from getting on site, because things start to happen if somebody shows up and wants to, spray paint the side of the building or something like that. It's an interesting concept that we've seen a few towns start to think about. Any thoughts about that?
I have a specific question. Is there an estimate of how much energy is required for this kind of school, like how much kilowatt or how much?
Yeah, well, that's a great point. So one of the things we want to do early on is determine what they call an energy utilization index, which would be based on a certain amount of energy per square foot per year. And so a typical number that a school might be at would be somewhere in the 40 to 50 kBtu per square foot per year range, and that would be whether it's electricity or gas on a site energy basis, and you can convert that to greenhouse gases and other metrics. That would be kind of a standard school, and I think one of the things we want to do is design the building in a way to reduce that number. And so target we might be targeting would be somewhere in the 25 to 35 EUI range. In terms of consumption of the building before we think about any where the energy is coming from.
Even in a year-round building?
Even a year-round building.
Because a conventional school isn't year-round, so that number may be, the baseline might be higher to start.
Yeah, so just thinking out loud what we did on Nelson Place in Worcester, which is probably this team's best effort for creating a real low energy school. If I recall the numbers correctly, before they look at the solar installation, which apparently just went live today. Pretty exciting. We were still in the low 20s on that building, and with this solar, we're not to net zero energy. We are hoping we're net zero electricity. It still has gas for heat, but its total EUI is somewhere in the 10 to 15 range. So it's pretty. That's a year-round school. It is a special ed program, full AC, year-round operations. So, I mean, all of these are projected numbers. This building's only been in operation for a little bit of time, but we think it's pretty close to that. So, we can create pretty low energy buildings and do it with mostly conventional processes there. It helps with the solar, which leads to the next topic I wanted to bring up briefly. It was a lot of discussion around solar and renewables. I heard a couple of comments about not wanting things like windmills on this site, but I think solar is always an interesting opportunity. You face some special challenges here in Shrewsbury. You've got a muni light plant, which is great in terms of your rates, but with the changes in the funding at the state level, it makes solar a tougher thing to do in these types of places, because you're not going to get the SREC income that you would have gotten in the past, because now towns served by munis are not eligible for any of that SREC money. So it's always a difficult challenge economically to figure out how to make that work. I think that at the minimum we want to make sure that we've got a solar-ready building, so that even if it's not something that's there on day one, it's something that could be put in over time as conditions change. And I'll note also that we often see projects even that are putting solar in immediately actually do it through a separate process, so that it won't be necessarily the same builder, won't be going through the same bidding process, but still might be on site because they want to be able to control prices or work with a third party, something like that. So comments here.
Keep talking about solar, what about geothermal? Is that too costly? Is out of the picture? I mean, you said the state doesn't reimburse us for solar because we're a municipal. I assume that would be the same for geothermal.
Well, so geothermal, let's talk about what geothermal is. So geothermal is a heat pump, and what a heat pump does is it transfers energy from one place to another place, and it uses some energy to do that. So if we think of an air source heat pump, it's like a reversible air conditioner. You put in 1 unit of electricity, and it takes another 2 units of heat from the outdoor air and gives you 3 units of heat in your building. A ground source heat pump or geothermal system is doing the same thing, except the difference is it's taking the heat from the ground, which is a stable temperature of about 50 to 55 degrees, instead of trying to draw that from 0 degrees outside that it might be doing an air source heat pump. So it's much more efficient because that ground temperature is closer to the temperature you're trying to get. So whereas a conventional air source heat pump might have a COP, a coefficient of performance of 3 units of heat for every 1 unit of input. The ground source heat pump would be higher than that. But it's generally not seen as true renewable energy because it still is running on electricity. It's not, you're not getting any additional electricity out of it. It's different if you were in Iceland or if you drilled really deep here in Shrewsbury and you actually hit like a hot spring or the geological activity there, then you could potentially, in Iceland, you know, they have power plants that take the steam out of the ground and use it to generate electricity. So we wouldn't be doing that. So the geothermal heat pump is a very efficient way to do heating and cooling, not usually thought of as renewable energy. There are some programs to support the funding of heat pumps. The Mass CEC has some. There's also what they call now the Alternative Energy Credits, or AICs, that the state has that apply specifically to the extra bit of heating that you get out of a geothermal system, or an air source heat pump for that matter. There are programs in both of these. So it's not, we'll have to investigate a little bit to see whether that funding would be available in a town that's got a muni. My sense is that the CEC funding is not available because CEC is also funded by the ratepayers in the investor-owned utilities. The state AICs may be available. We'll look at these systems and do the analysis. Our experience has been that geothermal gets you a little bit of efficiency beyond the air source at a lot of extra cost. So it's a tough one to make work. Yeah. You go next. What do you?
One was a comment was, and I don't know if that's not really for you guys or just for general town. You mentioned, obviously.
You're talking to us, but they're listening.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, we got to the point last year of going towards green communities, right? And so I don't know if there's any opportunity to tap, if we go further in that program, and probably get into it, that we can tap into some of those credits from that program to then offset costs of any geothermal or any other kind of energy efficiency that we try to seek for this project. The other thing to think about is we also have an existing program right now, not a lot of money, but we do have some existing credit with Mass DEP. And that's we have some credits related to the textile recycling program that we have, and just for having curbside recycling. So I think that's in the magnitude of like the $50,000 to $60,000 of credit we have existing right now. And so that's again Mass DEP, and just contacting our regional coordinator and help with that.
Did you have some?
Yeah. So Shrewsbury, I believe, has an interesting scenario where we're a muni and we have real low energy prices. So when we look at the town as a whole as to how much solar it's going to have, it's not going to have much solar, right? Because the residential aren't going to be choosing to install solar because they have such low energy rates. So if you look at, there's goals out there across the country coming up of 100% renewable energy, some by 2030, some by 2050. So if you at least say, how can a town look towards where would you put the solar? You might look at town-owned properties, right, would be an opportunity. One of them is to centralize, but a centralized model, you'd have big solar arrays with big battery storage. But another solution is to have distributed energy, where you put the solar where it's opportune on a town hall, on all your schools, and then you have battery storage associated with each one of those schools. Cost can be a factor, but it also gives you resiliency. So it means when you have power outage, if you put solar on your police station has battery storage with solar, and you may be able to power some of your schools and/or emergency buildings or town halls, all the things you want to protect and have resilient. So you can kind of have the sustainability that gives you this resiliency, and then also gives you this distributed model where you can use the battery to power the school at night. So there's different schools out there in Australia that are having these battery packs, commercial sized battery packs where they take the solar and they store it, and then at night they're powering while people are there at night. So I'm just trying to think that if we don't put solar in the schools, or we don't put solar at the town hall, then we're not going to have any solar in Shrewsbury other than the great work that Celco's doing to get us a solar array in the last minute to get, that could be it. But if we're looking at 100% renewable energy, then we're stuck. We have all schools and public buildings with no solar, no way to get renewable energy. So it's just another thought about there could be an opportunity where it's not just a price point. It's, how are we gonna meet these renewable energy goals if we don't prepare ourselves from a town perspective?
I think those are great points. I'll add too that we've seen some public school projects do battery storage. Greenfield High School did a pilot with some battery storage that we're involved with, and we're working with the town of Lexington right now, who is looking at putting battery storage in several schools. So, if you did that, you wouldn't be the only town in the state of Massachusetts looking at that. It's things people are thinking about. I think the approach that we're planning to take as the design team, and the building committee and the town should tell us if we're in the wrong direction, is that we want to make sure we're not precluding opportunities for doing that. So whether it's making sure that the roof structure is strong enough to hold solar, or making sure that we've got places that can be future solar, places to put batteries, how to make those connections, all those things are being thought about in the design. But we would need to see how the funding would be working, because it's not going to be covered by the typical MSBA.
That's our green communities. I know Jason mentioned it, green communities, we've got pretty sizable grants, if I remember, 100,000.
Yeah, there's definitely still some money out there from third parties, and there are, even if you don't have the SRECs and some of the other things, it's still power purchase agreement type of third-party ownership, maybe things that you want to think about, or maybe there are opportunities to work with Selco to do something on the schools. They may see a desire to do more of this on their own at some future time. So I think we ought to think of that. I'm really worried that we promised we'd be done at 9 o'clock, and I think we need to stick to that. We have covered a lot in some detail, and we've completely skipped some other things that we wanted to talk about tonight. Among them, the LEED versus CHIPS comparison, which I think we're going to skip unless somebody is dying to do that in the last 10 minutes. So let us just talk about a few more things related to the school.
Just 1 second, if you could.
Yes.
You make available to people who are interested information on those two?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll share it. Let me just give you the quick rundown of the primary differences. So LEED is a rating system that is generated by the U.S. Green Building Council, which is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. And LEED has different rating systems for all different building types, and they have a LEED for schools that is a specific rating system. So LEED has is a known quantity, both in terms of the contractors and subcontractors that might bid on this, and the general public. Even my mom knows what LEED is. Of course, I do it for a living. So CHIPS is specific to schools, and New England CHIPS is a rating system that was developed specifically not only for schools, but schools in New England. So it's used in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island. I'm not sure if it's used in Vermont, and Connecticut doesn't think of themselves as New England, so they do something else down there. So it's more specific on schools. It's got a few different requirements. Chief among them, one of the biggest differences is when you get the final certification. So LEED, you would do the final certification shortly after you finish constructing the building. Typically, there's about a 3-month lag at a minimum, depending on how quickly we can get all the pieces of paperwork together and how quickly the review goes. CHIPS has to wait until the commissioning process is complete, so that's a whole year before you can even submit. And so if you're waiting for the final MSBA reimbursement, there's a difference potentially of 9 to 12 months difference between doing CHIPS and LEED. The other difference is that CHIPS has many credits that are specifically about school policies and practices. So things like pest management and cleaning policies and the security piece and maintenance. Many of the things, so we need to engage the school and the school operations to do that. A lot of towns think that's a real strong point of CHIPS, but it also can be seen as a downside of it, depending on the approach. We've done CHIPS in the past. Sherwood was done with CHIPS. So there's no reason we couldn't do it here. MSBA is neutral. We just have to pick one or the other, and they don't really care which one we pick. So that's the short version of that. We'll give you the presentation, and you guys can entertain yourselves at your leisure, and if you want more information, I'm happy to come back and talk about that at another time. What have we missed here, Carrie, that we wanted to talk about? I think we've talked a little bit about the indoor environment and the mechanical systems and air and lighting. Are there other aspects of the indoor environment that we want to talk about at all?
We only touched upon materials and indoor air quality, but I think that's something everyone's going to be on the same page about, that with either rating system that you described, indoor air quality is really key in a school. And so we're going to be doing things like whether it's increased ventilation, CO2 sensors, low VOC materials, doing a flush out before occupancy to get rid of all the toxins in the building. All of those things are credits in both rating systems that I think are just typical that we always do on a project. If there's anything else above and beyond that, any questions on indoor air quality or concerns, we have a couple minutes to address that, but that's pretty standard.
Yeah, just a question on, it kind of relates, we look at indoor air quality and, toxicity of different elements within the school. But one question I had is related to technology. So one of the things that, as we move into a K-4 school, we're going to have a lot of Wi-Fi technology, I would imagine, in there. But I'm not sure, my question stems from, there are, different countries, and actually locally, there are different schools locally, Ashland and Worcester, are both considering like a smart wireless policy, where they are saying that, this isn't me, but this is, like the World Health Organization saying that Wi-Fi is, a probable human carcinogen. And so there are schools now that are trying to consider that we can't, we have technology that's coming, but if we're gonna have K-4, I guess I'm trying to envision air quality is also, the EMFs that are coming off. You have thousands of kids with potentially Wi-Fi devices and or Wi-Fi running all the time. They're saying there's gotta be some common sense things we can do, or maybe if you're not using them, you're not just having it running, so you have the the smaller children all day. So they say, like, can the teacher turn off the Wi-Fi when they're not using it? So that way there's common sense things, maybe. I didn't know if you had plans for hard wiring, is it all wireless?
So CHIPS actually has a credit related to EMF avoidance, so I want to just.
I don't actually know that much about it. We haven't attempted that on a project, but that's certainly something we can look at when we're.
I think it goes a lot to the policy. I know what we're thinking about in terms of technology, if that's something that.
There's definitely, fully wireless technology throughout the school. Obviously we will want to set it up for one-to-one devices for that capability in the future. So yes, it's going to be a very important part of the technology in the school.
Do they still hardwire the schools, or is it all wireless now? Like, do you have Ethernet connections that could support devices? It's all wireless.
Typically, wire, that's a community decision, but typically there's still an interest in.
There's both, really.
Right. A few areas, but limiting. And some of that goes back to the flexibility. The less you have to, you're a slave to that hardwire, the more flexibility you have in terms of your instructional capabilities.
You may or may not know, the town has actually made some great strides in their technology side, whereas there will not be a server in the school. It's going to be a centralized server, which you may not know this initiative, but we were pretty taken back by that because we haven't encountered another community that is taking that off-site and making it centralized, which this network really ties into that. So when we look at it as twofold as far as energy consumption of, those server rooms can be quite a energy hog on heating, cooling, electricity, you name it, where they've already made that.
I think the specific concern is the health issue.
Oh, of course. I just was bringing that up on another level.
Electromagnetic radiation from all kinds of things, and typically people have worried about, especially things like high tension power lines, where you have a very high EMF, and now people are arguing that your phone or Wi-Fi in space may be having an impact. And I think those are topics that you could find a lot of people on both sides of those issues. So it's a tough one for us to referee here, and really we need some direction.
Some of it's about turning off, like if you don't have a switch to turn it off, then it just runs all the time. Those are the kind of things that Worcester might adopt. So I'm just saying, if Worcester is going to adopt these and Ashland, maybe
it would be, too bad if we had the school and somebody adopted these, that we wouldn't have the ability to just turn it off when they're not using it, and have like a middle ground, like you're saying, that it's not, just doesn't run all the time.
So what I'd like to do, we got, by my watch, 4 minutes left here. And so I think we're just gonna wrap up and take any last comments. You guys have all been sitting pretty
Here to listen.
quiet. And I don't know if you have any thoughts or questions that you have.
Anyone on the committee?
Anybody here before we move on?
Thanks very much.
So our next steps are that we'll sit down with Katie and we're going to put together some notes of what we saw, and from that come up with an initial assessment of what are the things that we're going to be planning to do in the feasibility and SD phases of this project. And we'll come back with more questions and progress on all of these things, and the life cycle costing and analysis of different options will certainly be part of the process. Really, the very beginning of all that today, we're not walking out of the room saying that anything is decided at this point. But it is, it's the beginning of a process. Are there other thoughts or comments, anything that we just didn't get to that it was really important? Yes?
Two, access. I have been told that there is an access from the neighborhood that's to the west of the Glavin Center property. It's some sort of a right-of-way. And if you, see all that stuff to your left facing that? There's some place here that goes up through the soccer fields where I think, I could be wrong on this, but I've heard that there's a right-of-way that neighborhood could actually walk on some sort of a sidewalk up to that area. And, I just saw that on the site access. The second thing was, some people are affected by LED lights. It's not just the right kind. I'm not a doctor, but I know some people get really affected, especially if they're too bright. And I don't know.
Well, so let's talk about that. So there are a couple different perspective impacts from lighting. One of the things we've seen with fluorescent lighting, fluorescent lighting has a flicker that some people see. It's actually turning on and off a lot of times per second. And so some people see that and are bothered by that. LEDs don't have that issue, but they do have, depending on the fixtures that are, the lamps that are selected, different color temperatures, different color rendering indices. And we want to think about the appropriate colors of those lights. The very bright LEDs that we had a few years ago, we have a lot more options now. And also the ability to control them and dim them in ways that we haven't had in the past. So certainly there'll be a focus on lighting quality in the spaces, and that'll be part of that. And if you want to address that any further, or if I did enough for you there.
I think Tom had addressed that, so
Yeah.
looking at that, color rendition is an important component. And we do have to know.
Anybody else got anything they want to make sure we heard before we walk out of the room there? Yes.
Just also on the lighting, dimming, is there, I guess imagine, and I'm hoping that more expensive units would be, dimmers would actually not throw off a hum to those lighting systems?
The LED dimming will not hum because when you dim the fluorescent ballast, that's when it hums, but there are no ballasts with an LED fixture. So there is no humming. They know the word.
If you got the right dimmer with the right light, it should work. I mean, I think one of the things that we'll look at and analyze is different levels of lighting control. So, one of the options that we've looked at in some buildings is network lighting controls, where you actually are controlling each individual lamp in the building basically over the internet. And so there's a possibility there for an entire building to dim all the lights 2%, something like that. That's expensive, so that may not be where we end up, but that's something we can look at. And then there are more localized lighting controls. At the very minimum, we'll have the code required controls, which would include daylight dimming, occupancy sensors, and or time clock control, depending on what part of the building that you're in, so we don't have lights that are on when spaces are unoccupied. Okay, we're a minute past, so I think We're happy to take any other questions, but I think we're going to say thank you very much. I appreciate all the feedback and participation. This has been a really good 2 hours. There's still a lot of work to do, obviously, but thanks so much for everybody participating.
Katie, when do you anticipate the notes being available?
What, 10 o'clock tomorrow morning?
Probably within a week,
Yeah.
and
Good.
we can get this PowerPoint, which does include the major points about lead
Great.
and New England chips on it. We can put that up on, give that to you for
Great, thank you all very much. Thank you for coming out this evening.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
There's a motion to adjourn. Second. All those in favor, so signify by saying aye.
Aye. Those opposed? 0. Thank you all very much.